Hi guys, Alex here from ALEXEIR Studios, and today we're taking a look at a ancient magic runes appearing on skin effect. There, I said it. Make sure that you stay and watch through this intro because I will be sharing some important pre-production tips. So when we came up with this effect, we were really inspired by the Egyptian aesthetic. And by the way, so will be our next two tutorials in which we'll be recreating the double iris and cursed symbols effects from the mummy. Oop. You know, just gotta tease the next tutorial. Anyway, it will be a two-part tutorial, and if you're watching this video later in the future, the tutorials are probably already out, so make sure to check out the description. The link is probably down below already. Now let's get to some important tips on how to film for this effect. So you will need to place some tracker markers on your actor. For this you can just cut out pieces of tape, use sticky paper or anything else. The more contrast you have in the color, the better. We actually used white color paper, but this is because we had a well-lit close-up shot, so if that's similar to your situation, then white is absolutely fine, but I would use something like black color to just have a little bit more of that contrast. This way you'll make sure that you have a solid track. I will dive deeper into this at the start of the tutorial, but for now I have an important announcement to make. We now have a Patreon page where you can access all tutorial files, including Full HD or 4K raw footage, After Effects project files, any assets used in the tutorial, and other things. Make sure to check out everything we offer by clicking the link down below in the description. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, comment, and click on the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the future uploads. This helps the channel grow so much and it keeps the tutorials coming, so we really appreciate it. Now let's jump into After Effects. I want to start by identifying a few mistakes you can possibly avoid and also giving a few tips. So first, this is not necessarily a mistake, but in my footage the actress moves her back muscles quite a bit, and if this is the look you're going for, then that's great, but what I would change about my footage is I would have definitely put a lot more tracking markers on her back, and this comes from pre-production because I've put 6 tracking markers on the actress's back and you can only see 4 of them in the clip, and the other 2 are just like at the bottom and you can't even see them. And the other muscles that are moving, I don't have any tracking markers on there, and so I had to manually track that just by looking at the footage. So if you're going for that kind of look where a lot of muscles are moving and you need to track a lot of things, then definitely put a lot more tracking markers in different areas of your actor's back. Now on the contrary, if you want to avoid all the complicated tracking, then just ask your actor not to move their back muscles too much. Just ask them to stay as still as they can, and that way you won't have to track as many things. It's just gonna be plain surface that's barely gonna be moving. And just a reminder, the raw footage we're using here, along with the project file and all the assets we're using in this tutorial, will be available on our Patreon, which is linked down below in the description. I'm gonna start off by tracking the tracker markers, and I'm gonna do that by using the spot clone tracker effect. If you don't have the spot clone tracker effect from Red Giant, you can just use the built-in tracker in After Effects. You're gonna want to change overlay setting to faster tracking, track spot to position, and adjust the size of the tracker to match your tracker. Once you're finished tracking, I really recommend renaming the effects so that they're easier to identify later. For example, I named the first one top right, the second one top left, and so on. I'm gonna apply the second spot clone tracker effect and track the second marker. Then I'll do the same thing with the remaining 2 markers. So I added 2 more spot clone tracker effects and renamed them to ignore and ignore 2, so literally just ignore them. This is because I had those 2 tracking markers that are barely visible in the shot and I needed them gone, so I just needed to remove them. If you also have tracking markers that are not there for the entire shot, then go ahead and hide them as well. Okay, all the markers in the shot are now tracked, and next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color in the shot. If you want to color correct your footage, I really recommend doing it now before you apply any further effects. Our clip looked a little too red to me, so I made it kind of more yellow, more flattering to skin tones, and I also applied a denoiser effect because there was a little bit too much noise. Now we can actually get to the symbol creating part. We were thinking long and hard about the best approach to this, and the best solution we came up with is using text for creating symbols instead of images. So what we did is we went online and found a font that consists only of these Egyptian hieroglyph kind of looking symbols. We're going to leave all the links on our Patreon. So we need to start off by actually selecting the symbols we want to have in the shot. And the best way to do this is just to look at the website where all the symbols in the font are displayed. They literally tell you which letter corresponds with which symbol. So for example, if you click F on the keyboard, you get a specific symbol, or for any other letter. So I'm just looking at the website page, I'm picking the symbols I like, and then I go to After Effects, select text, and just type the letter for whatever symbol I want to have in the shot. I'm gonna type each symbol as a separate layer, and I'm just gonna place them randomly in any corner of the shot. This is just so we have all the symbols together, and later we will establish where we want to have what symbol. For now, we just need to have all the symbols we like somewhere in the shot and the composition, and later we will be taking them from the bunch and dragging them to the spot we want them to be in. As I said, unfortunately, I did not do enough pre-production for this shot, so I didn't have enough tracking markers on the actress's back. So I added one more spot clone tracker and tracked the top area of the back. I tracked it without the tracking marker, but I really needed to track that area because there was no tracking marker there. And I also turned off the denoiser effect just for now because it was taking up a lot of graphics and it was slowing down the render time. Okay, now we are ready to actually start placing symbols to where we want them to be positioned. I really want to create this kind of half circle at the top of the back. It's gonna be like a half circle and there will be a bunch of small symbols under it. So I'm taking the first symbol, adjusting its size, and then right away I'm going to go ahead and pre-compose it. Once I pre-compose it, I will go ahead and open up the position parameter, and I will activate the expression by alt-clicking on the parent parameter, and then I will go ahead and just drag it to the spot center setting of the last track that I did, the top of the back. Once you parent the position, you obviously can't change the position setting anymore. So what you can do is you can click on the layer and click A on the keyboard. This will open up the anchor point parameter and you can change the position that way. Next, I will want to modify the symbol that we just created and shape it into a half circle like I wanted to. So we see this lock thing at the top corner next to the composition. It's called toggle viewer lock. Let's click it and then double click on the pre-comp we just created and also click the lock there. Now you can just click next to it, hold, and drag the composition to the side, sort of. You can just follow on screen instructions. I think it's easier that way. What this creates is we now have a double view of both compositions because we're going to be applying a liquefy effect on the symbol and we need to see the changes that we are making appear in the main comp. So I will apply a liquefy effect and start changing the shape. And as I'm doing that, you can see what's happening in the main composition right away. Just make sure that when you're applying the liquefy effect, you are in the pre-comp, not in the main comp. So using the liquefy effect, you can change the shape of your symbols to anything you want them to be. Next, I noticed that we have a little bit of camera movement in the shot, meaning the camera is kind of zooming in and out. So I created scale and anchor point keyframes at the start of the clip and at the end of the clip, and I adjusted the scale and the position of the symbol. Spoiler alert, I'm going to be changing scale and position settings a million times throughout this whole process. So, you just do things and then you see if it works and if you need to change anything, and you're probably going to be adjusting those settings a million times too. So yeah, but again, it's a lot easier if you just ask your actor to just stay still and do the same thing with the camera, meaning you don't move too much, it pretty much just stays still. That way you won't have to make any scale adjustments or anything like that. The setting will just remain the same. In my clip, you also see that the actress kind of tilts her body up and down throughout the clip. So what I did is I I created a keyframe on distortion mesh parameter, and then I went to the beginning of the clip and I made the symbol look more kind of tilted along with her body. You can always go back to this and change the settings anytime throughout the process. Now let's get started on the creative part of the process. Just pick the symbols you like and place them wherever you want. It was really important to me that the composition of the symbols looks really nice, so I was doing this really carefully and making sure everything looks good together. So just pick the symbol you like, drag it wherever you want, adjust the scale, rotation, and so on. And you don't have to pre-compose them just yet. I only wanted to pre-compose and adjust the liquefy effect for the half circle because we will need to place other symbols under it, so I wanted to make sure that I have that done first. But as for the rest of the symbols, just place them wherever you want for now, adjust the scale, rotation. You can make some symbols appear smaller, some bigger, you can even duplicate some of them. You can flip them if you want, like make one turn to the left, the other to the right, and so on. Play around with this and make sure everything looks cool together. Okay, now that you have positioned all the symbols to where you want them to be and you have finalized their placement, you can then look at the spot clone tracker effects and group the symbols together according to the spot clone tracker effects. What I mean by this is, for example, we have a top right track with the spot clone tracker. This means that all the symbols that are placed in the area where the top right tracker is tracked, we will need to parent them to this tracker so that they move along with this tracker. This was so complicated to explain, oh my god. I really hope this makes sense, but basically, for example, I have symbols in the top right area, so I need to parent them to the top right tracker. So I will group them together and I will pre-compose them together into the same pre-comp. This way we will now have as many pre-comps as we have spot clone tracker effects. So in my case, I have one pre-comp which is top right, another that is top left, bottom right, and bottom left. And I also have two more pre-comps, which is half circle and small symbols. The half circle symbol thing will go separately and the small symbols will be together in the same pre-comp. They will be parented to that extra spot clone tracker effect I added. So next we will need to open up the position parameters and parent each pre-comp to the spot clone tracker effect it was created for. So for example, the symbols that are in top right area, I will parent them to the top right spot clone tracker. Symbols that are in the top left area, I will parent them to the top left tracker, and so on. And you can place the symbols back to where they were originally using the anchor point setting. If you want, you can always go into pre-comps and adjust the position or scale or rotation for any symbol. So I hid the top two layers, which is half circle and small symbols, because I will now focus on the rest of the symbols first. So first I will go into the top right pre-comp and I will open a double view window again. I will now apply a liquefy effect and I will animate the distortion mesh parameter. So I will first create a start keyframe for the distortion mesh and animate the shape of the symbols. Now you can really play around with the look here, but basically what I'm doing is I'm making them appear smaller at the top and bigger at the bottom. I mean each symbol separately, so that it looks like they're kind of tilted. I'm trying to match them to the shape of the back. And I'm also playing around with their shape in general. I am extending certain parts, making some parts bigger, some parts smaller, just basically playing around with the visuals and trying to create an aesthetic for each symbol. You can be as creative as you want here. The symbols that are on the side, I am making them look more kind of stretched, tilted to the right. Then I'm going to the top left composition and just doing the same thing. I'm creating a distortion mesh keyframe on the liquefy effect and also changing the shape of the symbols to any shape I want. And I'm doing the same thing for the other two compositions. I'm just opening them, applying the liquify effect, creating a distortion mesh keyframe, and changing the shape to anything I want. The main thing you have to keep in mind is that the symbols have to be tilted according to the shape of the back, and then you can also just play around with their look and aesthetic and, just make them look like anything you want, basically. I also went back to the half circle composition and I adjusted the liquify effect some more because I wanted to change the look a little bit. And finally, I turned the small symbols composition back on and I also changed their shape inside the composition. Great. Now, if you play the clip through, you will notice that the symbols kind of overlap. And this is because the back is being tilted, so we need to adjust that. I will be doing that by using WarpTransform effect from Sapphire. It's a really great plugin, I use it a lot, but if you don't have it, I recently found out that there is a built-in alternative in After Effects. It's called Transform. It's in the Distort group. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm going to the start frame, I mean the frame where you started animating the distortion mesh parameter in Liquify, and I'm just activating all the keyframes in the WarpTransform effect so that they don't change. Once all keyframes are activated, I am then going to the first frame in my clip and I am tilting each pre-comp according to how the back in the shot is tilted. And this can be really tricky because you have to really trust your eyes here. And what I found really helped is enabling proportional grid or grid settings. And then you can also look at such things as birthmarks on the back or any detail you can find. And basically you can see if the symbols are moving on the same line as those details. For example, I'm animating the small symbols right now and I see that there is a birthmark sort of like in the center of the circle, of the small circle. And I'm trying to match that so that the position of this pre-comp in the starting frame and in the first frame both align with that birthmark, so that in both frames the birthmark is kind of like in the middle of that circle. Do the same thing with all the other pre-comps. Apply the WarpTransform effect, create the keyframes on the starting frame, go back to the first frame, animate the keyframes accordingly, and go through the entire clip and see if you need to adjust anything else. And like I said, try to find birthmarks or any detail you can use as a reference. Use the grid also if that helps. The main settings I'm adjusting here are tilt and swivel, because I mainly need to just tilt the symbols or I need to make them look more sort of turned to the side. I'm also adjusting the shear X and Y settings. This step is really important and I really recommend taking your time with this. It can be hard, like I said, because you are just looking at things and doing them according to your eye, but the more time you take with this, the better it will look, because the tracking will appear more detailed and it will follow with the movement of the back better. So just make sure that the symbols stick to the same position throughout the entire clip and that they're tilted and scaled accordingly. So while I was continuing to do this effect, my recording software crashed, unfortunately, and it didn't save a fraction of the process. So I will just explain quickly what I did here. I went back to the small symbols comp and I added a second liquify effect. I went back to the starting frame where we created the distortion mesh keyframe in the first liquify effect, and I created a keyframe again on distortion mesh on the same frame in the second effect. And then I just went through the entire composition and I adjusted the shape of the symbols to kind of tilt the symbols even more, to change their shape to match the back movements. So in this second effect, I just used a bigger brush and I just tilted them as a whole, if that makes sense. I'm playing this through right now so you can kind of see how I changed the shape. It's basically just more tilted where it needs to be tilted and so on. If you also want to make the movement a little bit more kind of realistic, you can select all the keyframes you created and click F9 on the keyboard. Then I went back to the half circle composition and started doing the same thing. I also created a second liquefy effect, and I'm going through the entire clip and just adjusting the shape of the half circle. I'm paying attention and making sure that it aligns also with the birthmark and that the position remains more or less the same throughout the entire clip. I didn't have the recording for only those two compositions, but I do have the recording for the rest, so you will see this process being done from scratch now. So I will go to the top right composition and I will move it to the side so that we have a double view window again. Then I am going to the starting frame and applying a second liquefy effect. I'm setting the keyframe and going to the end of the shot. And here I'm just looking at how the back moves from that last keyframe that was created to the next one that we are working on right now. And I am adjusting the symbols accordingly. So I'm either moving them to the side or like tilting them a little bit, just basically looking at how the back naturally moves and trying to match that movement. And this process will be individual for every clip because where you need to create keyframes and how you will need to change them really depends on how the back moves in your shot. You just need to look at the muscles and how they move, and if there's any movement, you need to create the keyframes and adjust the symbols accordingly. So that is exactly what I am doing here. I'm just looking through the entire clip and trying to follow the movement of the muscles on the back as closely as I can. Then I'm just gonna go ahead and do the same thing for all the other compositions. And again, this is a really tricky and the most important part of the process because you really need to make sure that everything looks good together and that all the symbols, not only in the composition you're working on right now, but the symbols in all the other compositions, they work together and they move in the same way. As I was doing this, I was noticing that as I'm adjusting the shape of different symbols in different compositions, they kind of don't look good together. For example, the position seems off or like the different pre-comps interact weirdly with each other. So I was going back and forth and trying to change that so that everything looks good together and so that everything moves together. So just really pay attention to how the muscles move. In some parts of my clip, the muscles kind of like, I don't know, expand. So the symbols had to expand a little bit as well. I was just trying my best to make it look as realistic as I can, just so that it looks realistic to my eye. Once you take your sweet time making sure that everything is properly tracked and looks good together, we can now work on the look of the symbols. And this can get pretty complicated as well, so please bear with me. So what I'm doing first is I'm selecting all the pre-comps and I'm duplicating them. I'm gonna turn them off for now and I'm going to click on the top right pre-comp or any pre-comp you want to work on first, and I'm going to apply a fill effect to change color. So here you can select any color you want. I was going for these orange fiery kind of looking symbols, but you can really choose any color you want. You can even make them purple or green or anything you want. Next, I'm going to apply an optical glow effect from Red Giant. As an alternative, if you don't have it, you can use a built-in glow effect from After Effects. Here I'm just messing with the settings. I changed the alpha channel to generate, and I'm just making them very bright and making sure that the glow spreads a little bit around. Now I'm gonna change the blending mode of the layer to bin light. I found that in my case bin light mode works really well, but if it doesn't work in your case, you can try something else like overlay, or you can just experiment with different blending modes and see what works best. But in my case, bin light mode creates this kind of orangey glow around the symbols, which is really cool. So I went back to fill and adjusted the color a little bit more, and you can see that the orange glow around the symbol increases as I change color. And from here on, I adjusted the glow settings a little bit more. And what you can do from here on is you can select both effects, click Ctrl+C to copy them, and just paste them on all layers using Ctrl+V on your keyboard. Then change the blending mode of all layers to bin light. And you can adjust the glow settings for every pre-comp individually to create any look that you want. Okay, next I'm going to turn back on the top right pre-comp that we duplicated, and on it I am going to apply a roughen edges effect. I am going to change the edge type to rusty, and then I'm just gonna play around with the settings. As you can see, I created this kind of look where the effect is kind of sharp and applied only to certain areas of the symbols. It looks sort of like energy, and this is because I wanted to actually be animated and I wanted to move like realistic kind of fire almost. Next, I'm going to alt-click on the evolution parameter, and I'm going to manually enter an expression. You can see the expression on the screen. It's time, symbol, and enter any number you want. I went with 650, and basically what this number means is it's going to affect the speed at which your effect is being animated. So if you want something that moves faster, then put a bigger number in. If you want something that's very slow, put a smaller number in. You can start with 100 and build from there. For example, if 100 is too slow for you, you can try 300 or 600 or whatever works for your clip. I then added a fill effect. I left it the red color and changed the blending mode to color burn. Then I opened up the opacity setting and changed it to something like 26%. And then I went back to the expression and adjusted the time to make the animation a bit slower, so I went with 300. I went back to the opacity and actually changed it to 36%. What I did next is I copied the effects on the layer and I went to the next composition, which is small symbols, and just pasted the effect. And I did the same thing for all the other compositions. I pasted the effect and changed the blending modes to color burn and adjusted the opacity. Okay, I then decided to select all these layers and duplicate them again, and I went ahead and changed the blending mode to normal again, and I also deleted all the effects from the layers. I turned off all the duplicated layers apart from top right layer. And to this layer, I'm going to apply a turbulent displace effect. I'm going to make the size of the turbulent displace effect very small so that the effect is happening only around the symbol so that the distortion isn't all over the place. You can play around with the amount and see what works best for your clip, but the size has to be small and the amount of the displacement is basically whatever you want. I also set complexity quite high so that there is more detail. I am going to move all these duplicated layers to the bottom so that they are under all the effects we currently applied, so that they act more as a kind of a moving shadow under the symbols. And then I thought that the effect isn't that visible, so what I did is I applied a second WarpTransform effect, and I actually increased the scale of the layer and also adjusted the position of the layer so that it's not more in the middle, but basically it's visible enough. Then I went back to turbulent displace, and here I really played around with the look and increased the amount, increased the size just slightly. And also I alt-clicked evolution and entered the expression. It's the same expression, I made a time 650, but that didn't really work, so I changed it to 350. Lastly, I applied fastbox blur effect and blurred the effect just slightly so that the edges aren't that sharp. It's literally 0.3. Then I changed the blending mode of the layer to classic color burn. I then duplicated the same layer, put it under, and changed the blending mode of the duplicated layer to soft light. I really liked the variation these two layers give me because classic color burn layer is giving that kind of burnt look, and the soft light layer is giving that shadowy kind of look. So then I'm gonna go ahead and adjust the opacity of both layers, and I'm gonna set the classic color burn layer to something really small and soft light layer to something small as well, but a little bit more than classic color burn. Later on, I definitely went back to those opacity settings and adjusted it a couple of times, but I believe classic color burn layer was in the range of like 10 to 30%, and a soft light layer was in the range of 20 to 50%. Okay, so what I did next is I copied the effects and went to the small symbols layer and pasted the effects to that layer. I only copied the turbulent displace and fastbox blur effects. WarpTransform effect I will have to add individually to each layer. Same logic here, I just increased the scale in the WarpTransform effect and adjusted the position. On the classic color burn layer, I'm also going to open the turbulent displace effect, and I'm going to open evolution options. Here I can change the random seed parameter, and this is so that we have variation in the soft light layer and the classic color burn layer. The animation is just gonna be a little bit different. Then I'm gonna go ahead and repeat the same process for the rest of the layers. Okay, now bear with me. Go back to the pin light layers and duplicate all of them. Move them to the very bottom under the classic color burn and soft light layers, and delete the optical glow effect on each layer. Now we're going to apply a fastbox blur effect and blur them out a lot. I did the same thing for each layer and then changed the blending mode to overlay. Next, I created a new adjustment layer, opened up the position setting, and parented the position to any spot clone tracker effect. It doesn't really matter which effect you parent it to, because we don't need it to be precise. Now I'm going to apply a curves effect to the adjustment layer, and I am going to darken the clip. This is so that the symbols are a little bit more blended into the shot, and so that they pop more. You can also change the color if you want. Then I am going to create a really rough mask around each symbol group. And I'm going to feather those masks a lot. Next, I duplicated the raw clip and put it on the very top. I changed the blending mode to color and adjusted the opacity to something like 49%. I really liked how that changed the color of the shot and blended the symbols. I then duplicated the layer again and changed the blending mode to hue. I left it at 25%. And then I duplicated the same layer again and changed the blending mode to luminosity. Here I set it to something really small, like 14%. Then I went back to the adjustment layer and duplicated it. On the new layer, I deleted all the masks we have previously created, and I reset the curves effect. Here I created something like an S curve to make the back kind of pop a little bit more and to blend the symbols. Then I created a rough mask around the entire back. And then I changed the curves as well to make it pop even more. I then changed the colors in the curve. And here I am going to feather the mask out a lot by something like 280 pixels. If the mask doesn't stay in the more or less same position, you can go ahead and open up the mask path property and you can animate the mask path. It's very quick, you just need to drag the mask so that it stays more or less in the same position. I then decreased the opacity of the symbols. These are the layers with the pin light mode. I set them to 0 for now and I duplicated the raw clip. I moved it just under the pin light layers, set the blending mode to luminosity and changed the opacity to 20%. Then I duplicated the same layer again and changed the blending mode to color. Here I went for 50% on the opacity. Then I went back to the pin light layers, which are our original symbols, and I left them at the opacity of 80%. I then created a new adjustment layer. This is the third one now, and I also parented the position of this layer to any spot clone tracker effect. To this layer, I applied a CC composite effect, and I set the top layer setting to the raw clip. This is the very last clip at the very bottom. Make sure that the transfer mode setting is set to in front and the opacity is 100%. So what we're gonna do with this layer is we are going to create some shadow on the symbols. Because if you look at the back, some parts are more highlighted and some parts are more in the shadow, but symbols right now don't really reflect that. So I'm going to create masks around the parts that I want to have shadow on. And in my case, these are the sides at the bottom, a little bit on the top, and a little bit on the side at the top. I'm going to turn the CC composite effect back on, and I am going to feather the masks out. As you can see, we now have this beautiful kind of shadow on certain parts of the symbols. I then went back to our pin light layers and I duplicated all of them again, and I just moved them under. On those layers, I deleted fill and optical glow effects, and I then changed their blending mode to soft light. I applied a fastbox blur effect and set it to 11. And then I copy-pasted the same effect on each layer. I then went back to the shadow adjustment layer at the very top, and I animated the mask path for each mask. Not a lot, just to make sure that the shadow sticks to where it's supposed to be. As you can see, this really creates depth to the effect because it seems like the symbols are actually matching the lighting in the shot. Lastly, to finish off this effect, we will need to create a transition, as in symbols actually appearing at the beginning of the shot. So we will go to Layer, New, Solid, and we will just create a new solid layer. We will need to open up the position property on the black solid layer, and we will need to alt-click on the position and parent it to the spot clone tracker. If you need to adjust the anchor point, then go ahead and do that. Just make sure that the solid layer fills the entire work area. I renamed the layer to Transition and dragged it to the very top of the composition. Now I will need to create a couple of masks on this layer. This is just so that we have a bit of variety in our transition. I created two masks, one circle mask at the top for the half circle symbols and one line at the very center for the remaining symbols. What I did next is I went to the very beginning of the composition, the first frame, and I played around with the mask expansion setting a little bit. What I wanted to do here is I wanted to make sure that on the first frame of the composition, the symbols are barely visible and they start kind of showing up from there. And feel free to set this to whatever you want. What I mean is you can make the symbols appear out of nowhere, or you can already have them slightly visible and just kind of show up more from there. So make sure to play around with these settings and find what works best for you. I'm also going to be messing around with these settings and changing things a lot as we go further, so bear with me on this one. Okay, I set the mask expansion to -6 and created a keyframe. Then I went to the point in the shot where I want symbols to be completely fully visible, and I expanded the mask so that it covers the entire back. Make sure that the expanded solid covers the entire work area, because basically what the solid layer is going to do, it's going to influence the visibility of any layers parented to it. So once we later parent layers to the solid, the layers will only be visible in areas that the solid layer covers. This is incredibly confusing to explain, so I really hope you guys understood what I said. Okay, so I created a couple of keyframes here. One keyframe in the middle where I want symbols to be fully visible, and then I kind of just went to the end of the shot and expanded the mask all the way, just in case. Okay, what I'm gonna do next is I am going to apply a roughen edges effect to the solid. I'm going to change the edge type to spiky, and then I'm just gonna play around with the settings. I'm creating a kind of detailed edges effect here. The settings will be individual for every clip, depending on the look that you want. You can just create something similar to what you want for now and leave it to come back to this later, because we want to see the changes we're making to these edges actually influence the symbols. We want to see how it will look. So what we're gonna do is we're going to select all the symbol layers, all of them, including the shadows, everything. And with all the symbol layers selected, we're going to go to the track mat, and we will set the track mat to our solid layer, which for me is the first one. Now, if you scroll through the clip, you should understand what I was talking about. We actually started creating the transitions. So all the symbol layers are actually corresponding with the solid, and they start kind of appearing out of nowhere. I also selected the mask expansion keyframes and clicked F9 on the keyboard. Also make sure to feather both masks out for a smoother look. I set the mask feathers to something like 103. And now that you see the transition actually happening, you can go back to the roughen edges effect and you can adjust it however you want. I'm creating a more kind of complex shape and increasing the amount of detail in the transition. Also, if you pressed F9 on your keyframes, you can go to this graph and you can also adjust the speed at which the mask expands. This is the step where you should really take your time to make sure that the effect appears very smoothly and at the pace you actually want it to appear. I messed around with these settings a lot and I dragged the keyframes back and forth to make sure that the pacing is actually what I want it to be. You should do the same thing for both masks. As you can see, I kind of pushed keyframes almost all the way to the end. Once you take your time adjusting the mask expansion keyframes, you should have the transition all complete. I am now starting on the color grading process, but don't leave just yet because we have one more step to pull this together. Okay, I created the color grading look that I'm happy with, and now we have one more step left to finish this effect. And to me, this was a very important step too, because it really pulled everything together, in my opinion. This is going to be pretty hard to do without plugins, unfortunately, but this plugin is really amazing. I recommend it to everyone who's working with visual effects. I think it's a must-have. I'm going to create a new adjustment layer, and I'm going to apply a Heatwave effect from Red Giant. I think for what we're doing here, this really pulls everything together and creates this kind of warm effect, which is, I think, ideal for the Egyptian aesthetic we're going for. What it also does is it kind of composites symbols, because since this effect has blur, it also kind of blurs some detail out and makes everything appear smoother. Honestly, the default settings on this effect are already pretty cool, so if you're happy with how things look, you don't even need to change anything. But if you want to take it a step further, you can create some keyframes and animate things. For example, I created keyframes on heat intensity and blur amounts. At the end of the shot, I set the heat intensity to 7 and blur amount to 13, and in the first half of the shot, I left the settings at default, 10 and 25. This is because I wanted detail to be slightly more visible towards the end of the shot. Then I just added some film grain, and ta-da, we have the effect all complete. And that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope that you learned something new today. By the way, the person appearing in this video is my friend Megan. She's a professional actress. Make sure to check out her links down below. If you guys have any suggestions, any comments, make sure to leave them down below as well. Also, make sure to tune in next week when we will be covering those effects from The Mummy. And of course, don't forget to check out our Patreon. We just started it, and I think it's gonna grow into an amazing community, so make sure to check it out. And lastly, as always, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment, and click on the notification bell. And we will see you guys in the next video.